Now at 6 today marks 40 years since the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention published its first report on the virus that would become known as HIV/AIDS. And since then, according to the World Health Organization, it has killed at least 33 million people worldwide, and they're estimating about 38 million people are living today with HIV around the world. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight on KRON 4 News at 6. I'm Justine Waldman.
I'm Jonathan McCall. There continues to be big strides made in the fight against the virus. In the last 20 years, health officials say that new infections have dropped nearly 40%. Deaths have been cut nearly in half. President Biden marking the occasion today, saying in part, quote, in the decades after those first 5 men were diagnosed in Los Angeles, 700,000 Americans and 32.7 million people worldwide have been lost to AIDS-related illness, a heartbreaking human toll that has disproportionately devastated LGBTQ+ communities of color, and underserved and marginalized people around the world. The president going on to say that we remember the lives that were cut short by this terrible disease, including so many whose pain went unacknowledged for far too long.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi released this statement today saying, quote, in San Francisco, we remember the darkest months of the start of the crisis when many of us were visiting the hospital constantly and attending 2 funerals a day. Today, we are blessed to be able to celebrate birthdays, weddings, and retirements of our long-term survivors. Adding, quote, despite these achievements, our nation still loses 13,000 Americans every year to AIDS, a toll that breaks our hearts and continues to demand our urgent attention. And as Speaker Pelosi mentioned in her statement, while we have made big strides thanks to awareness and new treatments, those early years were fueled by fear, discrimination, and silence, which made treating the deadly disease that much harder.
40 years later, we're breaking down what treatments are available for folks living with the disease today. KRON 4's Philippe Djegal getting answers from an infectious disease expert.
The first 10 years of AIDS was just essentially watching people die.
Dr. Monica Gandhi goes even further in saying at one point AIDS was a death sentence. The condition is a result of the retrovirus HIV. When HIV becomes more advanced, those symptoms are called AIDS. A diagnosis means the person's immune system is compromised and susceptible to severe and deadly infections. Dr. Gandhi is a professor of medicine at UCSF and serves as medical director of Ward 86 HIV Clinic at Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital.
In the United States, we have about 50,000 people diagnosed with HIV every year. And unfortunately, that rate has actually not decreased, essentially for the last 10 years.
Still, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the number of HIV infections decreased by 73% from the highest rates in 1984 and 1985 to 2019. Dr. Gandhi credits better medicine. Ingesting one antiretroviral pill every day can allow someone who is HIV positive to live near normal life expectancy and never deteriorate to developing AIDS, though she says there are troubling patterns.
As we've seen rates go down among, for example, white gay men, we've seen rates go up in men of color who are gay.
She also fears the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in many infected people going undiagnosed because infectious disease and HIV doctors across the state had to turn their attention to the novel coronavirus. She says we are also not close to a cure.
However, what I'm actually really hopeful about for the next couple of years is the concept of an mRNA vaccine for HIV, because we learned from COVID how extremely effective mRNA vaccines are. And this is the new thought and the new test. And there's already been some animal testing with mRNA vaccines for HIV, that could we have ultimately an effective vaccine for HIV, which wouldn't cure it, but it would prevent it.
The CDC says an estimated 770,000 people died from AIDS-related illnesses in 2018. An estimated 35 million people have died from AIDS-related illnesses since the start of the epidemic. Philippe Djegal, KRON 4 News.